Should we worry about China's debt? Why has it been increasing so rapidly? What's its total size? What are its components? Worrying further, why the large differences between official statistics of the government and informal estimates by economists? Why the large differences of opinion among economists themselves, domestic and international, about how serious, even how dangerous China's debt has become? What about local government debt? Can they still borrow? Are they restricted? And what will the central government do if local governments fail to pay their debts? Another worry, why is China's official bad loan ratio lower than that reported by the IMF? Are we going to see more defaults in the future? Can China solve its debt problem? Understanding China's debt brings us closer to China. China's non-financial debt in 2015 stood at 168 trillion yuan, about 25 trillion US dollars, accounting for 225% of GDP. Of that total debt, the IMF estimated that government debt represents about 40% of GDP, while households account for another 40%. Neither is especially high by international standards. Corporate debt is a different matter, about 145% of GDP, which is very high. The IMF working paper warns that China's risks appear high but are manageable. In recent years, as China's economy has slowed, more defaults have been occurring. Investors are not buying the official non-performing loan ratio of less than 2%. Because 65% of China's corporate debt is from industries with overcapacities, paying back the loans are much more difficult. Some are speculating that China's banking system, even China's whole financial system, may face a crisis. There are so many different figures. It's not just what foreign critics or economists say that the Chinese official numbers are. It's even within the official Chinese government, when different departments report debt, sometime within a short period of time of each other, they give radically different numbers. How can we be even confident in the numbers that we hear?
First of all, we have different ways of financing. Bank lending, still the traditional official figures, about that. But now we have shadow banking. And then we have so-called internet financing. And we have other ways of the borrowing. So if you look at the things from the corporate sector, it's a lot of debt. Debt is bigger. Figure must be bigger than from other figures. And also some debt figures refers to the debt to the so-called non-financial corporations. Some figures covered everybody, covered non-financial and the financial institutions. So that's a different status as well.
Debt is a problem, and we need to understand why it's a problem. And unfortunately, economists don't. Finance theorists do. But it's a problem because it changes the incentive structures, it changes the nature of growth, and the structure of the balance sheet itself exacerbates whatever is happening externally. So when the country is growing quickly, the structure of the balance sheet makes it grow even more quickly. And when it's growing slowly, the structure makes it grow even more slowly. And the key is the historical precedents. There isn't a single country that has been able to grow out of a significant debt burden until it embarked one way or another on a significant debt forgiveness or reduction of the debt. And I would argue that that's really what China faces. It's got to address the debt problem. Otherwise, the historical precedents are quite clear.
We need to see how this problem happened and what the difference this figure means. Number one, China's leverage is high, corporate sector leverage is high, very much because China have very undeveloped capital market. All the money, most of the money goes to the banks. High savings, corporate saving, household saving, goes to banking sector. And then the lend to the corporate sector. Of course, the leverage is high. very little for the so-called the direct financing. That's the equity capital investment.
So what is the trend line for corporate debt over the last few years as GDP growth has damped down to roughly 6.5%? What's happening to the increase of corporate debt versus the decrease in GDP?
There's a relationship, but it seems difficult to calculate this in exactly numbers. But I would say because the other factors like when the company in the difficulties, they intended to borrow more, but repay less. So the debt increase faster. So these all factors twist together. Yeah. The GDP is lower, but the debt grows faster sometimes. Right. In recent years, the debt ratio over GDP ratio is really increasing. But is that increased more than 6.7%? I'm not quite sure. If we should calculate more on only the bank lending, or we should be including the shadow banking, we should be including all the financing, so-called social financing. It's a different formula. Anyway, but that's the problem. This problem compared to the other country, the bigger problem, I have to say for some countries, it's much bigger. Particularly for the country which rely on more the capital market, like US and some other European countries. But compared to those countries are similar financial structure, like Japan, I would say it's not as big, even much less big as the Japan. Japan, the corporate sector debt over GDP ratio is over their production ratio is something like 450. At the moment, the banks feel the pressure, and the corporate sectors really feel the pressure. Will feel the cost. The financing cost is really, really high, and the banking sector is facing this risk of default since the 90s of non-performing loan crisis. I think the Chinese banking sector, at least the banking sector, I'm not talking about the shadow banking, but including some shadow banking institutions, they prepare this for a long time. They have set up this kind of the risk management system. They put some money aside as this kind of the risk management funds.
What would you say is the problematic or watch list percentage of loans?
It really depends how you define it. 10% to 20% is possible. Mm-hmm. It's possible.
Now this is significantly less as a percentage than it was 20 years ago, at the end 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. That's much lower. But on the other side, the shadow banking is much bigger than 20 years ago.
The tangled web of China's debt is growing as shadow banking grows. After the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, the resulting fall in bank loans and deposits was accompanied by a rapid rise in shadow banking. This term refers to non-bank financing. It provides services similar to traditional commercial banks, but outside normal financial regulations. There are three main forms of shadow banking in China: bank financing products, deposits of non-bank financial institutions, and private borrowing. Define briefly shadow banking in terms of what it is, how it works in China, and what's the order of magnitude of its capacities.
Well, in China, shadow banking at the moment mainly refers to those so-called direct lending. It's not from bank, but they set up a program, and they ask the people if you want to join this program, so they can lend this money. You lend, many individuals may participate in this.
So who's doing that? When you say they
some
are
banks
doing...
and some financial firms.
Okay.
They're not banking, but they can set up. It could be one company to another company. It could be some so-called trust company.
I see. Mhm.
Trust company, they have some
Coordinated investors.
investors, and they can lend money. But this is not the investment; it's a lending.
Right,
There's
right.
a terms. There's a returns. Returns could be flexible. It could not be fixed return, but it's not the investment. It's still lending.
And
There's
they're
a term.
probably at high interest rates. because-
Higher interest rates.
Much higher interest
than
rates.
the banking sector.
Right. You would think, though, that that sector, because they're dealing with their own money, are tougher on making loans that will be good and performing loans and will have sufficient collateral. You would think that.
Yeah, there must be a lot of the collaterals against those lending, and there are some so-called guarantees. A lot of things happen. A lot of problems happen in China because of the guarantees, and people still trust the government. And the local government provide a lot of the guarantees, and people just trust it. I mean, the financial institutions trust it, and the investors.
Yeah.
I mean, the lenders trust them as long as they have the government guarantee, and the project normally goes.
Shadow banking would have its severe problems if the trust companies or the intermediaries have a different incentive than do the investors, because maybe those trust companies or those individuals are getting a cut off the top of the percentage, so they make money if the deal is done, and then whatever happens 5 or 10 years or 3 years, whatever, doesn't affect them.
Yeah, but normally this is a trust company project. I mean, the shadow banking projects are not 10 years, 20 years. Normally the short run.
No, of course,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah. Normally people don't trust the 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's a market. That's quite a market mechanism. What people can take.
Because if the debt is 5 years and the project of finance, revenue generation is over 25 years, that's a severe problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. But it seems that everybody work on that way, because we don't have the capital market. So now we start to have. So normally before we didn't have much long-term investors. Number one. Number two, we don't have the government bonds of 10 year, 20 year, 30 years. There's the long-term bonds. We should have more this long-term bonds. So everything is short-term. But people just believe we can roll over with the short-term.
So what's going to happen with some local debt? Let's just take local government debt, because some of it is not going to be able to be repaid for whatever reason. Is there an implicit guarantee of the central government? Will the central government be behind that?
Yeah.
And if not, and if local government is allowed to default, would that undermine the confidence in the whole system?
Yeah. Well, this already have been dealt with the program of so-called swap.
Okay.
The local borrowing and formal government debt swap. So the program is that central government gave some quota to the local government. So this year, you can borrow from the bond market by a certain amount of local debt, which is designated to swap, to repay your bank borrowing. So that's so-called the swap program. That already taken place since last year. So this is the right thing to do, because you should recognize this is the government debt. But of course, moral hazard problem here. If the central government that really come up to clean up your mess, everybody will issue more, right? So at the same time, the amendment of the budgetary law, including the terms that central government control the total every year's total of local government borrowing. I mean, local government bonds issued. which also need to be approved by the People's Congress. So you cannot, by this system, you cannot and you should not borrow as much as you want. There's a limit.
Since January 2015, an amendment to China's budget law allows more local governments to sell bonds directly to raise funds for projects of public interest. Bond sales to finance day-to-day expenditures remain prohibited, along with all forms of credit guarantees to individuals or entities. Professor Fan walked me through the amendment of the budgetary law in 2015, how it differed from the original budgetary law, why it changed in 2015, and what happened thereafter.
The originally budgetary law really forbid the local government to borrow any money. So that's a little bit out of the reality. Local government really have the responsibility to invest in infrastructures, local infrastructures, in massive scale. They need some financing. And all those projects, the long-term project, without return for 20 years, 20 years. So that need financing. You need to borrow from future, right? So the amendment is basically allow the local government to borrow some money. Yeah, that's create an additional problem. That you have to control the borrowing from those trust company. So it's more difficult. Better to be more, put in a formal system, allow them to borrow, but they control how much they borrow.
How does the central government actually control the local government?
Well, officially, on the paper, it should be every year have a budget, have the debt budget. Which how much central government to issue the bonds, how much the local government can issue the bonds, and distributed among the localities.
And what happens is each province then lobbies the regulators to get whatever they want.
Everybody lobby.
Yeah, right, of course.
Heavily.
Right.
They must do that. That's their duty.
Yeah, right.
And then, of course, if add up of everybody's budget, it must be huge.
Yeah.
And then the central government wrote to cut up.
Right.
So make some balance and then they give the budget. But that's normal. That's normal situation. As every country have the same. You compete, try to get more cut from the central federal budget. During this amendment of budgetary law, local government didn't lobby very heavily against the change. Of course, this is a kind of the deal. They got the rights of borrowing officially, and not as before. It's a shadow of the local platform. But they also, I would say, they also realized, and everybody agreed that if you allow local government to borrow without the limit by the central government, even the local government themselves, officials themselves understand this is not the way of doing it. Better to can borrow more, but the problem created by everybody, it's really the mess. Everybody realized. So that's why I think the amendment process quite smoothly. People accept this deal.
I think that's a very positive development. I remember stories from the past where I would hear stories about local officials encouraging their enterprises to borrow, and then specifically encouraging them not to pay it back.
Yeah.
Not overtly, but literally telling them, don't pay it back, that's the central government, because that was the best for their province. And some people say, oh, that's very immoral. But it wasn't. They have a responsibility to build their province, and they were under the system as it worked. That was good for their province. So these people were operating according to the system in the best way that they thought possible.
That's right.
But collectively, that's a disaster.
That's right. But I would say the fundamental problem is still there. even with this kind of the arrangement.
So define the fundamental problem.
The fundamental problem is that the ultimate responsibility of repay all the debt is still the central government.
How do you make that change in the U.S. When you have municipal debt and you make an investment in a municipal bond, you get certain tax benefits, but you're taking 100% of the risk. If that county goes bankrupt, you lose your money, and no one even thinks that the state or the federal government, no less, will bail you out.
Yeah. You are the responsible party. It's ultimate because it's autonomous. The state is autonomous, right? State is have the accountability.
And everybody, the investors know that.
Everybody have the knowledge, and when they buy the debt. So, but here, people don't distinguish from the local government to the government. As long as the government, it's ultimately guaranteed by the central government. So that's still the problem.
And do you see, how do you see that changing? Because if the central government would suddenly say no and allow defaults in provinces or whatever, the whole system, people would be very shaky for the whole system. I mean, that doesn't seem right either.
I don't assume that to happen anyway. This is not imaginable in the current system. It never happened. Central government always take responsibility, as a big father, as I said. So that's the difference. That's the difference of Chinese system and other. So this when we think about the issue of China, we need to think about this is very fundamental difference. There's a few fundamental issues, but this is very fundamental. For example, the average Chinese, if you ask them what is the federalism, they don't know. Or fiscal federalism, they don't know. Federalism means autonomous region, right? You're accountable for your own debt. Then the federal, that's a concept of the federal system. Here is just a central government.
Just government.
Government it's Beijing. It's not the local. It's all the way. The responsibility is all the way to the central. So that's a very much different. And then local government just behave that way.
So in recognizing that, what are some of the prescriptions that you would have to deal with debt in general, local government in specific, and corporate, everything else in general?
I would say for the moment, for the government debt, I think the most important thing is to try to discipline local government borrowing behavior. Stop their, platform borrowing further. You may increase the swap by the central government. You can even increase the government overall debt percentage, but stop the institutional problem of that loophole, the
off-balance sheet, the trust companies.
Yeah, off-limit borrowing.
Okay.
The limit is set by the central government, but off-limit borrowing. That's I think the most important thing. And it's not difficult to apply, to implement it. This is a government behavior. You have, a lot of the people watch on that. You can do it. You can have this. Then the corporate sector issue is really how to deal with the overcapacity and the zombie company, and how to really close down some company and write off some debt.
That's the motivation primarily for supply side structural reform, and you can't just deal with finance problem in corporate world by itself.
Yeah,
you have to have a very broad plan.
It's everything related. Overcapacity, over stockpile, and over leverage is one thing together. You have to have reforms for that, reform of the corporate sector, and the reform of industry. The restructuring of industries, and merge acquisition, the debt swap, and everything, the write-off, everything together, and to do this. And you can see this is very much a political issue, because there are a lot of interest groups involved. So that's why sometimes I said in China, when you're dealing with these problems, you need a political decision.
政府的债务危机啊，被媒体放大了。
The government's debt crisis has been amplified by the media. In fact, it is not so dangerous. According to results announced by the National Audit Office, local governments' debts are spent on the public services and infrastructure construction to improve people's livelihood. So the money was not wasted. It has been used to build a large number of excellent assets, including high-speed rail networks, highways, and municipal engineering such as water and power supply, waste disposal, sewage treatment, etc. When these are put into use, they will gradually play a bigger role in the future.
那么这些呢，它在未来的使用中间会逐步的发挥作用。现在我们个人消费品和生产资料已经全面的。
Our personal consumer goods and means of production are now in overcapacity.
供不应求，是短缺。
But public products are in short supply, such as transportation, communications, medical care, education, social security, environment, and so on.
教育、社会保障。
The reason they're in short supply is that for a long time, public products and public service relied mainly on the government's financial input. The shortage of financing leads to lagging development. Now we have found a systematic solution, a model that allows the government and enterprises to cooperate, referred to as the PPP model. So, if the government wants to do something good for the people, they can design a project, then start the bidding to attract enterprises and social capital investment.
那么政府呢，想为老百姓干什么好事儿啊？那么你就
If we establish certain policies for these projects and let them get a reasonable return, without making them excessively money-making or money-losing, the government can have public service problems solved.
项目呢，要给它一定的政策。
As long as we adopt this mechanism, a lot of difficult matters will become easier to deal with.
也不让他赔钱，啊，这样呢，就能够把政府想干的这些公共服务的事儿呢，把它解决掉。只要采用这个机制，好多很难解决的事儿，都变得比较容易了。
China's debt is not easy to quantify, even less to assess. The consensus view seems to be that, in general, local government debt is manageable. And anyway, the central government, like it or not, will stand behind it. But corporate debt, especially of state-owned enterprises, is debilitating and must be reduced. No one I've met takes seriously the official non-performing loan rate of about 1.5%, which is based on narrow definitions. Analysts estimate the real non-performing loan rate to be between 10% and 20%. To me, a positive indicator of economic progress would be an increase in officially reported non-performing loans, because that would mean that the government is prepared to clean up the financial system, which is necessary for sustainable growth. In addition, debt for equity swaps are necessary. One danger is that clever financial schemes can keep zombie companies alive to maintain employment or to delay debt write-off. But that just kicks the can along the road. Someone, sometime, must face the discordant music. Watching China's debt keeps us closer to China.